Okay, so first I will start with a diagram of a dopamine neuron. So to start, we have the cell body, which is here in yellow, or the soma. This is what keeps the cell alive, and it provides nourishment for the cell. Basically just keeps it healthy and alive. Within the cell body or soma is the nucleus, and attached to the cell body are the dendrites, which are these green things right here. Dendrites are what receive signals from other nerve cells, and then they pass those signals on to the cell body or the soma. Dendrite spikes, which are these little black dots right here, and I've circled some here. These are like memories related to drug use, so they can trigger memories of good drug use, such as when a drug made you feel good, or they can trigger impulses that are similar to like survival impulses, and those impulses are going to be caused by drug addiction behaviors, and those are basically just like memories related to drug use forming on the dendrites. Moving on to the axon, that's going to be that orange guy right here. The axon is where the message from the cell body passes through in order to reach the axon terminals, which are these pink guys. Axon terminals are where the message that passed from the cell body through the axon is passed then on to dendrites, or cell bodies or terminals of other cell bodies that they're trying to communicate with. So basically, the message moves from the cell body through the axon into the axon terminals, and then those will then go through, pass to the dendrites and other nerve cells. The terminals of two neurons passing messages between themselves actually never touch, but they're separated by synaptic gaps. So if we move down here to my two little diagrams of synapses, this one is when the message arrives, and this is when the message is transmitted. So, so they don't ever touch. They are separated by these synaptic gaps. It's the space right here in between the two neurons that are communicating. And when a message needs to be passed along, it is electronically transmitted in the neuron and communicated across the synaptic gap between that neuron and another one. So here is the electronic message. It's an electronic form, or the nerve impulse, and then it's going to be passed along through the synaptic gap right here, and then is going to reach the neuron that it is trying to communicate with. When it is communicated across the synaptic gap right here, it's actually no longer in the form of that electric signal, but instead it takes the form of neurotransmitters, which come through, which are carried by these dopamine-releasing vesicles. So I have the little neurotransmitters here, those little tiny blue dots. And when they pass through, as you can see right over here, they go through as neurotransmitters, and then once again, they are transformed into an electric pulse. So the neurotransmitters and releasing vesicles are released from the vesicles across the synaptic gap and into the receptor sites, right here, dopamine receptor sites, on the neuron it is communicating with. And within that neuron, it is then relayed as an electronic signal, again, to the next neuron. And then this process continues until the neurotransmitters reach the part of the body or the brain that it needs to get to in the end. So when we look at dopamine neurons and dopamine transmitters, dopamine is a type of monoamine transmitter. And basically what it does is it regulates muscular activities, emotions, and it has something to do with the addiction pathway. It's often referred to as the reward chemical. So we went through what happens during the synapses. Basically, the dopamine vesicles carry the neurotransmitters. They are translated from an electric pulse into the neurotransmitters across the synaptic gap, and then they're once again in the dopamine receptor sites. Once that happens, you can see them being transmitted across the gap, and then they are once again translated into this electric pulse. So that's a typical communication between two neurons. If we want to look at what happens when a dopamine neuron is under the influence of cocaine. Okay, so basically cocaine contributes to the release of norepinephrine, which is a stimulant, and it also contributes to the release of dopamine from vesicles within the neuron. So here are dopamine release vesicles with their neurotransmitters, and then this is the cocaine, these little yellow dots here. Basically what happens is because these norepinephrine and dopamine neurotransmitters are being released, they then stop being able to be reabsorbed through the reuptake ports. So basically the reuptake ports are blocked by the presence of the cocaine. So there they are, blocking the reuptake ports. So these neurotransmitters are unable to be reabsorbed into the neuron. So now that both of these neurotransmitters, norepinephrine and dopamine, are present in the synaptic gap here in extremely large quantities, more than usual, this can actually intensify or exaggerate the current message, so the triggered impulse, and it can also cause it to double and just new ones to occur. So the person who took the cocaine is able to stay active and hyper way past the normal point of getting tired, and they continue to feel this way until all the neurotransmitters that are not being able to be reabsorbed start to deplete. What this eventually means is that the effects of the same amount of cocaine will become weaker over time, and the user will actually need larger amounts of the drug to feel that strong of a feeling again. So overall, because the cocaine does block the reuptake ports here, and then therefore those neurotransmitters are present in an abundant amount, more than usual, and they're not being reabsorbed, they actually lead to a more intense or exaggerated feeling and just stronger electronic impulses when they're once again translated into electronic impulses. And so the frequency and the intensity of that electronic signal in the neuron that's receiving the message is going to increase under the influence of cocaine.